started sort of with that question, right? Of wait, what exactly is inflation? Like, why is everything going up but my wages? Who is keeping this money? Where is it going?
I think about the same thing. Where's my money going to, right? Like when I put it in the bank and that money buys less and less, why is it buying less and less? Who's basically, it feels like someone's taking that money from me and who's doing that?
I'm originally from El Salvador, and I came to the U.S. because my family was attacked by government death squads. I'm pretty open about that. We had to leave almost overnight. You know, it was like 72, 96 hours or so when they released my father. Guess what happens to your private property, right? Guess what happens to what you have worked for, right? When you have to leave because the government wants to silence you, you can't bring it with you.
Welcome back to the Orange Pill podcast. I'm your host, Nicki, and today I'm joined by someone who's been putting in the real proof of work on the education side of Bitcoin. Sal Pineda first fell down the rabbit hole in 2017, co-founded the Cornell Bitcoin Club, and has since published research on the intersection of Bitcoin mining, energy policy, and even politics. He calls this building a Bitcoin knowledge network, which I love. It's basically just open sourcing research and education so that anyone across the world can join in on the journey. He's been traveling to conferences and diving deep into how Bitcoin fits into the US political economy, which is an important conversation to have. We're going to be diving into his story, why mining, policy, energy, and politics matter in the Bitcoin world more than people realize, and why Gen Z has a unique role in shaping Bitcoin's future. With that being said, let's get into it. Sal, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
I love that intro. I want to meet that Sal. That's very generous of you. Thank you, Nikki. And I'm just, I love what you're doing. I think is we need more, not less, of this podcast. You're spot on with the knowledge network. So happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for that generous intro.
I mean, thank you. Your research is just incredible. I read through your paper in preparation for this so that I could have lots of questions to ask. Yeah, I mean, let's start with your backstory. When did you first discover Bitcoin?
That's a great question. I've heard about Bitcoin. I think many of us have, back around 2014, 2015, I believe. And it was sort of a passing thought. I was at Georgetown and doing my first master's, and back then, Bitcoin was not as it was associated very negatively. Where I had a lot of negative connotations, and it was, used for online stuff and just negatively in general. I didn't really pay much attention, but around 2017, I had already joined the private sector after serving as a diplomat. I had earned my first master's, and being in the private sector, I sort of started seeing the real impacts of inflation on small business owners, on entrepreneurs, on folks just trying to get by as well. And I started sort of with that question, right? Of wait, what exactly is inflation? Like, why is everything going up but my wages? Who is keeping this money? Where is it going? And sort of asking those questions, and I then came around Bitcoin again, and I was able to sort of connect the dots, right? It's just started connecting. I said, okay, well, hold on. So there's something that is immutable. You can't print more of it. You can't confiscate it, and it monetizes atoms. It's backed by actual electricity. It's not like a software like Microsoft Word. It's not like Google Docs or you name it, right? And I fell down the perennial rabbit hole, right? I said, okay, let me dive into this, and it had back then it allowed me to start connecting the dots to a lot of sort of my questions for my background, my life, and sort of my own journey of saying, huh, okay, this is pretty cool. Let me really dive into it. And what about a decade after or so, I'm now dedicating this chapter of my life to Bitcoin. Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome. Asking all the right questions. Because I think about the same thing. Where's my money going to, right? Like when I put it in the bank and that money buys less and less, why is it buying less and less? Who's basically, it feels like someone's taking that money from me and who's doing that? But if I'm correct, you did your MBA at Cornell, right?
Yes.
Or what was it like on campus, being a Bitcoiner?
You're asking the honest questions. I like that. So it was. I'll put it like this. I think I was fortunate enough of being at the right place at the right time. So let me kind of backtrack a little bit so that there's even more context on what it felt like to be there at Cornell. So I'm originally from El Salvador, and I came to the U.S. because my family was attacked by government death squads. I'm pretty open about that. I talk about that in my paper. And when they assaulted my mother and I a few years after they kidnapped my father. So when we had to leave almost overnight, it was like 72, 96 hours or so when they released my father. Guess what happens to your private property, right? Guess what happens to what you have worked for, right? When you have to leave because the government wants to silence you. You can't bring it with you, right? You can't really bring your things, your car, your home, and anything you've accumulated. So coming to the U.S., it took my family like 14 years to become U.S. citizens. We're proud U.S. citizens, grateful at the opportunity that this country has allowed us to work for. But I always had the question of why did I go through what I went through, right? Why did my family go through that sort of state-sponsored violence, and how can I fix it, right? And I found the answer at Cornell, but that was almost, quarter century, like 20 some years after I first came to this country. So trying to connect the dots here on your question, at Cornell, I was able to see the beginning of in the adoption curve. We're still really early, really, really early, but I started to see the sparks of knowledge and being on campus at an Ivy League institution. For some people, that's very important. And I was like, okay, let me go to Cornell, let me see that. And seeing sort of what Ella Huff, shout out to her, what she, it all started with an email. I remember it was sort of fall 2023, November-ish. I had gotten into campus that summer. And I remember in November, I was doing all my finance classes and strategy and very, very fiat finance oriented, right? Like understanding finance and really from a fiat perspective, right? And I was already orangepill. I was already sort of deep in my journey of Bitcoin since 2017. But I get this email. I remember it was November, and he said, "Hey, there's a free screening on campus." And I don't even know how I got it, but he said free screening on campus from to see the documentary Dirty Coin. Dirty Coin is a pretty amazing documentary where just sort of they what the sort of the director wants to show is, hey, Bitcoin is actually not a dirty coin, because if you monetize these atoms, this is what it can look like, right? This is what bringing electricity to really remote villages that have no electricity in Africa look like, right? This is sort of the national security component of, so it's very amazing. And I had already heard about it, but when I saw that in fall 2023, I said, wait, this is on campus at an Ivy League institution? There's actually Bitcoiners here? And I remember telling my wife, I said, okay, we need to go. I need to see who else is even interested about it, because in my ecosystem at the MBA level, in that sort of, group, right? It was very, nobody's talking about Bitcoin, and whatever they said about Bitcoin tended to be fairly neutral to negative, right? Mostly negative. And I'm being very, very candid here. So I walk into a room with my wife to sort of see that free screening, and I meet Ella Huff, and she graduated from undergrad, same time I did in May. And she was just there getting ready to screen the movie. And then I see other folks that had come into the room, and I said, okay, this is amazing that there's folks that actually care to know more about it. And obviously, as any Bitcoiner that appreciates proof of work, I said, okay, how can I add value? What can I do to support this? How can we bring more of this sort of safe spaces for folks that want to learn more, right? And now, a few weeks after, I was fortunate enough to be able to become a founding member of it. And the rest is history, right? The Cornell Bitcoin Club serves as sort of proof of concept of what's possible. And through the Bitcoin Student Network, I mean, there's now Bitcoin clubs across many, many universities through the world, right? Different continents. Coming from a place where I always was asking questions, why was it that my family went through what we went through, to walk into a room where there were other people interested in something that is unconfiscatable, that's, they can't print more of it, that provides many, many solutions, that benefits poor people and rich people at the same time. Very few technologies do that. It was just incredible, and I took it as a sign, and I said, okay, this is amazing. Let me sort of continue exploring and see if I can actually add any sort of value into the knowledge network of Bitcoin. I really am a big believer on that, right? Because the Bitcoin network it's really just a distribution of knowledge, right? And there's folks that have been in the space since 2010. I mean, Adam Back, we still have him. Hal Finney, we rest in peace. We no longer have him, but there's folks that are truly OGs, and there's newcomers that, how can we support them and meet them where they are in their knowledge, right? And that's sort of where I said, well, you know what? There's a knowledge network really that connect us all to Bitcoin, and debate. It's phenomenal. I think it's needed. The moment folks stop talking. I think that's the concerning thing, right? We should talk, we should debate, we should sort of have these conversations. So to me, coming from a place where not only did I experience sort of a lot of the things that Bitcoin can fix, but going through a journey of learning through traditional institutions, my undergraduate degree, my first master's from Georgetown, working in the public sector, private sector, and then pausing my career for a 2-year sort of full-time immersion at Cornell. Being a Bitcoiner at Cornell felt pretty transformative. That will be my very long-winded answer to your question. It was it showed me and it validated, okay, this is going mainstream. This is beginning to actually pick up in ways that, when I first heard about it in 2014, I myself dismissed it, right? But 2017, I went down the rabbit hole, and, to see it now where it is, I mean, to see you across the world doing this podcast, it's just so inspirational. And I commend you. I mean, and I think we need more of this. I mean, I really do, across many continents, across different languages, different ages, different everything, right? And that's what I think is the proof of this knowledge network. And being at Cornell just validated my conviction for thousands of hours of research on Bitcoin's potential and the world. Very long answer. My apologies, but yeah, I hope that I answered it.
No, I mean, Sal, I mean, you've had an incredible journey. Just hearing about it, I mean, I feel inspired, and the battles that we fight, they're only there to make us stronger, right? But I do want to ask a bit more about campus, because I mean, I'm in college right now. And at the moment, I'm studying over in Australia. And I've, attempted to get my podcast out there. Majority of my viewers are not Gen Z. They're not from Australia. They're not the people that I know in my day-to-day life. And I do want to get that message out there, because we're seeing something so transformative, as you said, come into play. And there's an ideal fix to all of the problems that we're facing monetarily and even socially in some regards. So what would be your advice to maybe some, college students across the world, maybe some of the younger content creators who want to start talking about Bitcoin with their friends, but aren't really sure where to start?
That's an amazing question. And I'm moved that you're thinking at that level as an educator. Really, I honor that. I mean, that's very impressive, because I think so my demographic at the Cornell Bitcoin Club was mostly grad students, some undergrads, but sort of what I focus on was grads, right? So these are folks that have been on the labor force. They graduated college, they have worked for 5 to 10 years, 12 years even, and then they say, you know what? Let me go to an Ivy League institution. Let me get a 2-year MBA, because I want more, however they define it, right? I want more income, more prestige, more whatever. And you meet different things move different folks, right? Something I distinctly remember, and I still, sort of encounter that when the Bitcoin conversation comes, but the folks that tend to be primed to understand it the most, or the easiest, I think, is sort of folks that like to win. So to your question, right, I think there's many ways to frame Bitcoin, many ways. And, and Bitcoin it can be anything for anyone, right? So as a content creator, as an educator, I would say not many people like to lose in general, just in life, right? In anything, like nobody wants to say, hey, you know what, I want to lose, right? And then when you start from that perspective, what I found was most people either have some sort of wealth, abundance in material things, or at least in abundance in a mindset, and they say, I want more of it. And for those folks, right, we can quote Larry Fink, right? We can sort of say, hey, you know what, you allocate 1 to 2 to 3%. That can be a very good hedge, right, against sort of fiat debasement. And the government is very unlikely, for review history, to go into deep austerity. They're probably just going to print away solutions to problems, right? So that's sort of the TradFi Larry Fink, who I think is a sign of wisdom to change your position with new information. And Larry Fink has led the way. He said, I think he called Bitcoin back in 2018 or something. He says something like, is an index for money laundering. And and then he obviously, over the years, he got a lot of feedback and demand from investors. And when he announced the ETF that has become the best performing ETF for BlackRock, he said, you know what, I was wrong, right? I'm paraphrasing here, was I was wrong. I think there is a potential for Bitcoin, right? And the market has validated that. So that's sort of that perspective, right? I think you can frame it in a way of, listen, if you have some wealth, you have some accumulation of success, right? Material, Have you thought about multiplying it, right? Have you thought about protecting it, right, from being taken away through taxation, through inflation, however it is that that demographic wants to listen to that message, right? But then there's also the other component, right? There's the component of, and I always say this, there's also people that maybe they don't necessarily like to win, right? Because of whatever they fall in, whatever political framework or whatever perspective they have. They're like, you know what? I don't really care for winning that much, but I hate losing. I don't like to lose. It sucks to lose purchasing power. It sucks to have to delay having to buy a home because I can't afford it. It sucks to delay. These are conversations I heard from undergrads and grads here at Cornell saying, I can't really start a family. I can't get married. I can't even get engaged because I can't afford to provide. I have folks that have said, you know what, I would love to buy a home. I can't afford it. And I have to work these really intense jobs to get paid on something that's been devalued every day. So it's very frustrating and frankly, desperate. It creates a lot of desperation, right? At least that's from primary sources, like my data, what I've encountered when I interact with dozens, if not hundreds of folks over my last 2 years or so in Cornell. So you can frame it for folks that hate to lose and say, hey, you know what? There's one thing that's immutable, backed by energy. It's unconfiscatable, and it's actually fully decentralized. And nobody can take it away from you. And you can vote in a peaceful way by allocating, whether that's 1%, 10%, or 50% of your fiat, you can allocate it to the network. And, depending on where they are in the financial acumen, right? You can say, look at their CAGR over the last, since inception, right? So as an educator, right, I think I have found that those are the best ways to connect with folks because folks in general hate to lose or want to win. You can, Bitcoin can provide an answer in whichever framework, your audience speaks. And there's something distinctly empowering for me when I see youth like you asking questions from a place of genuine curiosity. Like you're genuinely saying, okay, so why is this happening? Why can't I afford a home? Why is it that my grandpa had a home by 30 years of age and a few kids? And you come from a very, first principles perspective, right? Where you're like, okay, well, let's see. Is it about money? Bingo, it is. Okay, well, what about money? I'm in Australia, think about you, right? I'm in Australia doing the right things. I'm paying for my degree. Why can't I buy a home? And that leads to some very uncomfortable answers most of the times. And if we're lucky, we can be there as educators to help folks digest that, right? Process that and say, yeah, listen, it is tough. Our grandpas, not only were they able, and grandmas, right? They were able to sort of provide for a family and sort of buy a home, but they also had a pension and a social security. We're probably not going to have that. And if we do, we will buy very little. It's going to have a very, very small purchasing power, right? And that is very uncomfortable for most people to sort of even process, right? So as an educator, I think particularly for your generation, that's something that you can, with a lot of kindness, right, and a lot of compassion, you can say, hey, listen, yeah, these are tough things. And this is sort of what Bitcoin can offer. And obviously you don't want to convince anyone that makes that I don't think that's the purpose of education, right? The purpose of education is to present education. Then folks decide, right? Like people decide based on their frameworks, their perspectives, their life experience. And, that we're so diverse, right? There's no monolith of humanity, right? Much less Bitcoiners. So as an educator, I think framing it for, hey, if you like to win or you hate to lose, there's this potential, it's the Bitcoin network. This is what it can offer. And just provide context across the entire learning curve. There's folks that are deep technical folks that really want to understand the immutability in the code. There's folks that want to understand sort of the human rights perspective. There's folks that they're really driven by the CAGR of Bitcoin and finance. So that's something where you can engage, right? And then we all become very, and I say this very, 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 very often, folks like you and I that they're trying to educate, we really have to then dig deep on what Bitcoin can be and it is, because Bitcoin is sort of everything you don't understand about finance, everything you don't understand about computer science, sort of merge into one thing, and then you add a sociology layer to it, and that's sort of Bitcoin. So you're just like, oh my goodness, how do I explain this to someone in all of 15, 30 seconds, right? That's what I have found to be successful and help folks through their learning journey. That's sort of what I will say. But we'd love to hear from your opinion. I mean, you're an educator. What feedback have you gotten? What have you seen?
I mean, I've tried to talk to my friends as much as I can about kind of asking them what the problems are that they're feeling. So I like to ask them. So a lot of them work. A lot of them are working right now in college. So I ask them, when you get your paycheck, what do you do with it? When you receive your payment, does it go into a savings account? What's the interest rate on that savings account? Are you aware of what the inflation rate is here in Australia? I mean, in the US, I think, I'm not sure what it was this year, but in 2022, was it where it reached like 9.2% or something? It's pretty bad. So you can assume that most, savings account, the higher ones, they tend to yield maybe like 3 to 4% interest if you get really, really lucky. And inflation rate, they tell us it's around 2 to 3%, but that's, the M2 metric. And you can go, there's a whole different argument about how, inflation actually is about 7 to 10%. But I'm not going to get into that right now. So I do try to ask them what they're feeling. And a lot of them do agree that, they feel like their coffees are getting more expensive every day. Their living expenses are getting worse and worse. I mean, grocery bills are going higher. And in Australia, it's particularly bad, especially the housing crisis. I mean, we have one of the worst housing markets in the entire world right now. So we do discuss these things, but I think Bitcoin, when I introduce it, it seems almost intimidating to everyone else. They kind of take a step back and they're like, whoa, okay, like I didn't ask for that. I thought you were just going to give me like invest in S&P 500 or, keep saving. I introduced Bitcoin and they get totally, totally freaked out. So I do want to bring it down to your core research. And I want to ask you, there's this myth. I'll say it's a myth, but it might not be a myth, that Bitcoin is bad for the environment, that mining takes up a lot of energy, a lot of water, and that's why a lot of people are averse to it. And same thing with AI. So a lot of people are kind of wary of technology because of the environmental impacts. So is this true, or is this something that, we've kind of escalated onto a whole nother level?
So it's a powerful question. And thank you for sharing sort of the insights of what you're seeing in Australia, the housing crisis. And I can only imagine, the US also, it's also got some data, some data on sort of how the average age of new home buyers is just being delayed is older folks, right? Compared to folks 20, 30, 40 years ago. So, different countries, similar issues, right? And I think that just speaks to, sucks to, there's something inherently broken within the sound money structure, right? And that framework. And it is scary for most people. So thanks for sharing sort of from your personal experience. I think yeah, we need more of this content. We need more, to connect with folks wherever they are, right? And help sort of dispel these fears on what they don't know, which is also very human, right? It's very human to fear what you don't know. So, and within that fear, right, there's something distinctly different that similar to you, I have had a similar experience of when it comes to energy uses, at least here in the US, there seems to be an inherent sort of lack of deeper understanding with where we're heading, right? And not just where we're heading as a society, right? AI uses incredibly high amounts of energy. I mean, incredible, right? But also, and it's funny, I'm actually rereading this book from Alex Klassen, Check Your Financial Privilege. I think everybody should read it. Incredible, incredible thought leader in the Bitcoin space, leads the Human Rights Foundation, and very amazing work. Hopefully we can link it on the video. But so thinking for first principles, right? I'm from Osaka, born and raised there, spent many years there. There were times where there was no electricity, rolling blackouts. While we're at it, we can talk about water too, right? Back in the day. Like the infrastructure, right? It was a country that just went through a civil war, right? It's emerging from a civil war. So you can imagine what happens to the infrastructure, right? The physical infrastructure, right? As I say in my paper, and many, many other folks have spoken about this, lack of electricity has correlations to so many things: early deaths, increasing diseases, a lack of functional development for minors, right? So many things. So if we frame where we're heading in the future as somewhere where we don't need more electricity, but less electricity, then there's something fundamentally then there's a wide gap right there, right? Before we even get into Bitcoin and AI, it's like, hold up, we actually need more electricity. It's really nice to say that from a first world developed country, right? Let's get on our electrical vehicle. Let's get our $5 latte from Starbucks, turn on our Mac, and turn on our electricity. Yeah, that's nice, and many blessings to folks that have that daily life experience. There's billions of people that don't have that life experience. There's billions of people that cannot, with a switch of a light, have electricity. There's billions of people right now, as we film this, that literally have no access to no potable water, right? So they're lacking basic infrastructure. Electricity is obviously one of them. So before we even get to the Bitcoin conversation, and I talk about this in the thesis, we need to talk about the electricity conversation, right? It's like, hold up, if we need more electricity, then what are we doing for it, right? What is the future going to look like 50, 100 years from now, right? Is it going to be small modular nuclear reactors? Is that where we're headed? Is it going to be fully, renewable? Like, what is it, right? And I think the AI, that Bitcoin mining had a lot of fun, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, fun, that sort of a community term, thrown at it. The Chinese government banned it back in 2020, I believe, 2021. Hash power went all the way down temporarily. Those miners relocated to the U.S., mostly Texas, and other countries as well. So I think in general, Bitcoin monetizes stranded, wasted energy that otherwise wouldn't be monetized. What does that mean? It uses energy that would have been wasted regardless. And that's kind of where you can start going into the weeds, right? And maybe that could be a separate episode where all we do is talk about Bitcoin mining, right? Because there's so many ways to engage this topic where, most folks don't even know that, at least through the grid in the US, there's a lot of electricity that doesn't even make it to your house because it's wasted. Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin miners it's an option where it can prevent that waste. It monetizes it, right? Creates a win for the community, and it can help stabilize the grid, right? But we don't need to talk about the US, a developed nation that, we have, or Australia, we can just light the switch and we get electricity. Let's talk about Kenya, right? There's a company named Gridless, and I talk about this a little bit more deeper in the paper. Gridless is literally going to places in Africa like Kenya, where there's remote villages that have very little infrastructure, no electricity, and there's incredible research done on this in YouTube videos and everything, where they're really literally partnering with the local communities, sort of like a public-private partnerships. They're able to create local infrastructure, regional infrastructure near hydropower, where they're able to provide that electricity, right, to the local communities, and whatever is not used, you're able to monetize it to mine Bitcoin. It's happening already. It's like real things right now, right? And then somebody can say, well, screw that. Let the government do it. Well, it hasn't done it. The government hasn't done it. And obviously for folks that are in the space, right, it's super expensive to create that type of infrastructure. But obviously miners know, hey, I can mine this with electricity. And if you understand what you're mining, pretty much the hardest asset on earth, the soundest money ever created, then why wouldn't you do it, right? So it's already happening right now, and it's bringing electricity to those communities, and electricity is correlated, right, to better responses to health issues, right, better educational outcomes. I mean, having access to light alone, we don't need to go into details in what that would do, right? So this energy conversation can lead to so many deeper conversations, right? And I think Alex's book, particularly if folks are saying, let me just drive my Tesla and enjoy my Mac and my $5 latte and let me save the world with a sticker, right? Advocating for less electricity. Yeah, then we'll probably need to have a deeper conversation, right? And that's sort of where this part, where this knowledge network of what you're creating, I think that's where, the more episodes, the better. The more subject matter experts you bring, the better. The different voices you bring, the better. And I think in general, there's a lot of peer review studies now coming, and just a lot of more research in general, right? Beyond just proof of concept and actually doing it, proof of work, the way Gridless is doing it, that shows, hey, no, listen, like not mining Bitcoin can be a waste of money, a waste of productivity. Let's mine it to capture that, to give resilience and stability to the grid. So to me, the energy conversation, so many layers, but one of them, right, and tying it back to my own life story is, let's bring, there's a justice component to bring in villages and entire regions that have suboptimal access to electricity. There's an element of justice and support and growth that Bitcoin allows for those millions and billions of people, right? And we need more, not less of that, right? There's Bob Burnett, who's another incredible gentleman, but we can link him on his X profile, incredible thought leader practitioner within Bitcoin mining. So just in general, I think the electricity conversation, to your original question, there's so many layers to it that Bitcoin can help answer, but you sort of got to meet folks where they are at. Is this the MacBook $5 latte, access to electricity all the time from a developed nation that wants the rest of the world to use less electricity? Okay, no, then we got to talk about financial privilege, right? Because it sucks to have rolling blackouts. And maybe this person has not experienced rolling blackouts. What does that mean? That means that your region once a week only gets electricity for 3 days. What the hell do you do the next 4 days, right? So that's sort of where I think Bitcoin mining can enable and empower that stability in that infrastructure in ways that, just private sector alone or just sort of governmental efforts fall very short in many, many different countries from doing that. It's a great question, by the way.
I mean, all these questions, I was reading your paper and they were coming up. And another thing I wanted to ask was if Bitcoin mining can actually help, get more or create more renewables and use more renewables and even grid stability across the world. Where does Bitcoin fit into this conversation?
That's a phenomenal question. And, there's giants in this field, right? My contribution is tiny compared to what they have spoken about. The Bitcoin Policy Institute has incredible, amazing literature that research on this. And just in general, that's peer-reviewed literature as well, research on this. But I do think in general, Bitcoin mining can, and there's data on this. Last time I checked, I believe over 50 or so % of Bitcoin mining globally is sourced from renewables, right? I think that what Bitcoin mining can allow is sort of a sustainable demand for the production and consumption. So it's both ways that can enable the sustainability of those efforts. Air, wind, other small nuclear reactions. It helps both ways. Let's produce more of it and let's maintain the stable demand for it, right? And Bitcoin mining, obviously the biggest input into mining Bitcoin is energy. So if you think about it, right, from a first principle perspective, then if that's the largest cost, these folks will move to whatever cost is most efficient. And if we're moving to a world where most of the energy is being produced by sustainables, then we need to incentivize that production of renewable energy. And how do we do it? Well, we need to create that demand for it, right? And that's sort of where the free market dynamic comes. So I do think it plays a pivotal role and answer to where we're moving, obviously, as a world of creating more sustainable renewable energy sources. That's a great question.
You mentioned a little bit about the free market. So I want to get into, a bit about economic policy. Can it be said that mining, energy, and economic policy are pretty much inseparable?
But this ties to the second paper that I wrote, which that's a great question. And I'm a believer because of the research that I've done, the thousands of hours I've spent, that eventually policymakers will find deep value and necessity in incorporating Bitcoin mining at scale, at nation state level, at regional level. But from what I've seen so far, from the research that I've done, and you alluded a little bit to that, to the trips I've done, and to sort of this what I'm seeing, I think policymakers are still not fully on board with that, and there's many swaths of policymakers that haven't even gotten to the part of Bitcoin mining, much less Bitcoin, and we have data, right, of officials actively attacking Bitcoin, right, from different countries, different nation states. So while I have conviction that eventually Bitcoin mining will be part of the economic policy making at nation state levels, the Kingdom of Bhutan obviously has been doing that. They have been mining that. So we have actual, similar to Gridless in Kenya, we have actual examples of nation states mining it, and they're open about it. And they're using their incredible abundance of hydroelectric power and resources, water, to mine Bitcoin. And I believe they announced a few months ago or about a year ago that they sold part of their Bitcoin stack, what they have mined, to fund a very generous increase, I believe, on sort of the government, right? The government employees, like they want to empower folks with what they have mined, right? And again, every nation state thinks differently of what Bitcoin does, but the Kingdom of Bhutan, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, is showing us data that, hey, no, it is possible at a nation state to do it. And, we continue mining it, but as the price increases for us and our population, we feel that we're going to sell some to distribute some of those wins and increase the standard of living for our country, right? So is it being done? Of course, yeah. The Kingdom of Bhutan is doing that. The mining component, they have policy on it. Are other countries going to adopt it as quickly? I don't think so. There's a lot of nuances, right? And people, policymakers have to think a lot more than just on Bitcoin, right? Even though Bitcoin can help and address a lot of challenges that societies face, but from a policymaker perspective, you have to, you can't just focus on that. So that's, I think, what's hampering, and will take a little while for policies to be supportive, I think, net positive, and see the potential of public-private partnerships on Bitcoin mining, or just publicly mining it, right? Like the Kingdom of Bhutan. But I am hopeful, and I definitely have conviction that on the long enough horizon, we will see nation state mining from the way the Kingdom of Bhutan is announcing and is doing it.
Okay. And is, nation state mining, is that something that you see happening in our lifetime, or is that going to be something that's, for the next generation or the one after?
At scale, I think in our lifetime. Obviously, right now, we can point to the Kingdom of Bhutan, who is openly mining it. So we have one that's openly saying, no, we are mining it, and here's, this is what we're doing. So that you and I can say, hey, no, the Kingdom of Bhutan is doing it. At scale, globally, that openly announces it and says it, that will take a little while. How long? I do think we're going to see more within this next decade, for sure. I think that as the world in general, whether that's Australia or the US, there's so many nuances to sort of national, regional, local politics and challenges, right? And sort of this political economy on a state level, national level, global level. I think that Bitcoin in general will be elevated through those policy conversations. Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining within the next decade, they will be elevated to the higher level. And I think that in our lifetime, to answer your question, I do think we will see sort of bigger nations mining it. Yes, I do think so.
Getting to that point in the world, I mean, that would be incredible. So let's talk a little bit about, Bitcoin meeting politics. I mean, you've been in DC, so you've been probably in those rooms and in that environment. And I wanted to ask, I mean, first things first, is Bitcoin becoming a partisan issue, or is this something that can stay what it's meant to be, what it's meant to be unifying?
We're asking the good questions. I like that. I wrote a piece on this, I think, and I think I say it in that piece. While Bitcoin doesn't care in general, blocks come out every 10 minutes. Policymakers care, and policymakers can make it pretty comfortable, pretty uncomfortable for me to send you some sats if I want to right now from the US to Australia. They can put penalties and fines if they want to, whether that's on the Australia end or the US end, for that transfer of sats. Would that kill Bitcoin? Of course not. But they can, right? They can put that friction. If I want to open source develop and contribute to the Bitcoin network, they can penalize, right? They can criminalize that act, right? It's being done, right? And we can look at Operation Choke Point in the US. Right? In the last administration, there's a lot of research and insight coming out now on just how the state started showing a choke point attack to the network. Debanking folks that worked on Bitcoin, just horrible. Overnight, you have no way to pay folks, right? You've been cut out of the entire fiat system, right? To maintain sort of your building process. So while Bitcoin doesn't care and Bitcoin is apolitical, Bitcoin is code, right? It's like the internet. It's like this. Like we're using, what is this platform? Riverside. We're using Riverside to chat. I love it. And I'm grateful that Riverside has created this. But, Riverside is not pro-Bitcoin because you and I are talking about Bitcoin. Same goes with Bitcoin, right? Whether a progressive, liberal, conservative, or somebody that hates all the labels and wants zero government, anywhere in that political spectrum, if you own Bitcoin, you're not going to change Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin tends to change you, right? And there's data by the Nakamoto Project. Hopefully we can link this to the reader. This is led by Professor Dr. Troy Cross, incredible research producing on sort of the profile of Bitcoiners, right? How do Bitcoiners self-identify? And I'm paraphrasing here his incredible research, but he just published this report a couple months ago where he said, in general, Bitcoiners, people that own Bitcoin or have exposure to Bitcoin through IRAs, 401ks, all of that, they tend to just care more about everything, whether you're from, anywhere in the political spectrum, right? And I think that Bitcoin, it has shown is an unkillable network backed by proof of work. But politicians and politics has shown us that this is not going to be an easy adoption curve. There will be state-sponsored attacks to the network. And Operation Choke Point was one of them. The ban by China for the miners is another one. Like objectively, right? Those are attacks to the network, just objectively, regardless of where people fall into politics. So the more we strengthen the knowledge network, and thank you for bringing that up. And I loved hearing that you connected with that term. The more we strengthen that knowledge network across the entire political spectrum, age spectrum, everything, right? Geography spectrum, the more politicians that respond to the people that have elected these politicians, if you live in a country that has representative democracy, right? The more that politicians will have to respond to things that you care about. And one of them, as Bitcoin adoption increases, will have to naturally be Bitcoin and the right to use Bitcoin, whether that's allocating a percentage of your money, your fiat money, because you don't want it to be printed away, or whether that's your right to send some sats. Nicki and Sal want to send some sats to each other across the globe, and Nicki and Sal do not want to have any penalties or be criminalized because we send each other 2-3 sats. Are politicians from Australia or the US going to respond at the same speed, tempo, support of the network? Probably not. Every state, every region is different. Constituencies are different. Values are different. But in our lifetime, and we're seeing it now, right? Across the globe, we have now nation state leaders openly adopting and endorsing Bitcoin, right? The Kingdom of Bhutan, right? El Salvador, President Trump, right? They are actually saying the word Bitcoin. These are actual presidents saying that in the political discourse. I mean, nobody was saying Bitcoin in 2010, 2011, right? At those political levels. So if this plays out, and it is playing out, then we're going to have a lot more nation state leaders saying the word Bitcoin. And that's only a response to demand from their base of voters, which is no different than Mr. Larry Fink. So Larry Fink now is talking positive about Bitcoin, not just because he was presented with new information, but the base of customers that he serves inform him, hey, we want Bitcoin. And he said, okay, well, and my role is to add shareholder value. Let me create a product. He created the ETF, and he has become the best performing ETF for BlackRock, I believe. So we see Bitcoin bubble up to these leaders, finance leaders, political leaders. And I do think while Bitcoin doesn't care, in due time, a lot of politicians will care even more about it.
I watched you on the Bitcoin Nova with Stacy, and you guys, I love her show. Stacy's awesome. But you guys were talking about, the recent election that we had and how Bitcoin, President Trump took the name, and then all the Bitcoiners were like on the fence, and they, saw that Bitcoin, was actually valued and actually thought of by one party. And this is a whole new voting block, right? This is an emerging voting block. And I want to connect that back to Gen Z, because for a lot of us, 2024 was our first election. And
right.
Albeit it was definitely an interesting election, there was a lot going on, a lot of decisions that we had to make. And that's part of growing up and being an adult and, having the privilege to be an American citizen. You get to make that difference in a country that is so formative for the state of the entire world. So do you see Bitcoin becoming more and more of maybe a voting issue in the future as we progress into, more and more elections?
We need a part 2 for that one, because I love that question. Sign me up for a part 2. Yes, I do. And I can tell you my entire thought process on that. I'm working on 3 distinct pieces right now. One of them addresses that. And I used to be a diplomat, so I'm passionate about this. Nicki, this will be So just to show a little bit of proportionality to the viewers, right? Based on this research from the Nakamoto project that we discussed a little bit earlier, there's about 48.7, let's round it up to 50 million US adults of voting age, right? That now have report exposure to Bitcoin, either self-custody through the retirement vehicles or through their partner. Just to think in proportionality, that's, and I'm quoting Professor Troy here, that's as big as the Catholic voting bloc. When's the last time a new voting bloc has emerged in US politics? We gotta go back decades ago. So as Bitcoin emerges across party lines, it's being adopted by folks across the entire political spectrum, the African Americans, Latinos, white folks. And the Nakamoto project sort of highlights a race breakdown, age breakdown, gender breakdown, and it's broad. I mean, across the entire distribution. Then thinking here from, as we map this out into the future, then what is there to gain by opposing Bitcoin? And I can tell you a specific example. Former Senator Brown lost an election, and he credited the election, the loss, to many things. But there's an element of in that loss, the Bitcoin lobby and the crypto lobby at large as well spent a lot of money in that particular state supporting a candidate that won, had a more supportive view of Bitcoin, right? And the overall digital asset community. So you really then start seeing the effect of the voters that value their exposure to Bitcoin and how they're connecting that to politicians that openly attack Bitcoin and other digital assets, obviously, because I believe Senator Brown, former Senator Brown, he was very supportive of Elizabeth Warren's, Senator Warren's war on, anti-crypto army, which, the entire ecosystem mobilized to sort of start showing that political might of the Bitcoin voter. And this is only a derivative, right, of economic power, right? Because political power you don't get any power in politics. Political power is a derivative of capital power, right? Economic power. And Bitcoin is a life raft for so many, about 50 million people in the US, that if you take a policy stand of attacking that entire group, of wanting to criminalize Nicki sending Sal 3 sats, if you as a politician want to criminalize or make it impossible for Nicki to mine her own Bitcoin in her private, 2-acre farm, if you want to make it criminal for Sal to become an open source developer to Bitcoin, then you're pissing off those voters. There's a direct relationship. It doesn't take much thinking and analysis, obviously, to see, well, if any position I take against this is a net negative for this about 50 million voters, and obviously there's a distribution by state, right? Different states have different population levels. Then why not at least learn a little bit on what Bitcoin is and how can I at least understand it and make an informed policy decision instead of equating Bitcoin as an index of money laundering, which not even Mr. Fink thinks that anymore. And he's open about it. And you can see, I think it's a sign of wisdom, as I said, to update your position with new information. And he did. So there's a direct role of folks having exposure to Bitcoin, which is a life draft, something that's unconfiscatable, and folks can store their life's effort, their wealth, right? Which, what is capital? Capital is nothing more than an effort that you put of your life into something. You then get compensated, and then you want to store it away. And then there's about 50 million US folks that understand that they have owned it and they have exposure to this asset because of that and many other reasons, obviously. And then what? Politicians are going to take positions to attack that. They will continue losing. And I argue this in the paper. I've spent hundreds of hours, and that's definitely that's going to be a different, longer episode, but I am deeply passionate about it. And I think that it is emerging here in DC, the Bitcoin voter. And the new paper I'm working on is called The Bitcoin Question. Eventually in town halls, eventually as Bitcoin adoption curves increases, I think there's going to be informed voters in going to these town halls asking, hey, do you support Bitcoin? Just like right now, you have the Second Amendment question in this country, right? In the US, at least, is are you for or are you against gun rights? Are you for, in whatever you are in that political spectrum? Well, I do think eventually we will get to a point where politicians who have to face the Bitcoin question. Just because you have about 50 million voting age adults in the US that have exposure to it. So yeah, I am a strong believer that eventually this will be a meaningful conversation in policy circles. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're kind of seeing it already, right? I mean, on X, I don't know how serious this is, but we're seeing the Bitcoin party emerge, where people are calling themselves, Orange Party. I vote orange, and I mean, it's incredible. As you said, we haven't seen a new voting bloc in decades. So Bitcoin is really something that's formative, which brings me to my next question. I don't understand how it is that, makers and governments are trying to or want to ban Bitcoin. Because the way I view Bitcoin, it's like the internet, right? And you can't ban the internet. I mean, that's virtually impossible. Same thing with Bitcoin. Trying to delete Bitcoin is trying to delete the internet. Again, impossible. So why is it that, policymakers and governments are so anti-Bitcoin?
Wow. I love it. I absolutely love it. And just my gut feeling answer that from my research, but kind of condensing the message here is politicians don't want to give up control through the entire political spectrum. I don't care if you're a liberal or a Democrat or Republican, Libertarian or Green Party. I mean, in different countries have different sort of political parties, right? Giving up control tends to limit your ability to print unlimited money to fix problems temporarily, but you still fix them. You get to the next election and then you say you fixed it, you get more votes, and then you get in. You continue winning. Not making any judgment on politicians' intentions. That really depends on where folks are, right, on their politics. But we'll talk about DC. Politicians that win in the respective states that come to DC don't like to lose. If you come to DC, it's because you won, and you tend to be a pretty good strategist. You deploy a pretty good strategy in whatever state you come from, and you are rewarded with being democratically elected into DC, whether that's from the Democrat or Republican, whatever, the whole spectrum. So when Bitcoin comes, the Bitcoin conversation, right? Think about it, something unconfiscatable, something that Nicki can send Sal 3 sats, and I can't really prohibit that, right? I can't really tax that. And not only that, but if there's a fixed supply to this, what if I need to print more to fix whatever policy challenges I might be dealing with, whether that's a financial crisis from '08, the COVID crisis, that we can name so many crises, right, through history, at least in the US, that the response tends to be, let's print more money. If I cannot do that as a policymaker, as a policy planner, right, of policy, then my gut feeling at first as a policymaker is, okay, well, that might not be a tool of statecraft. Right. And obviously there's a big gap in knowledge there, because they say, no, hold up. As we get deeper into understanding Bitcoin, it leads me to the second book I have. It's the book is called National Security in the Digital Age. Bitcoin as a tool for modern statecraft. It's an incredible book where, if as a policymaker, your gut feeling is, okay, well, I can't stop Nicki from sending Sal some sats. It's a network that somebody from Australia can develop something. What if I don't have any sort of political relationship with Australia, right? I don't want that. I don't want that in the firewall of my country, my nation state. Then you can see how Bitcoin has how policymakers can have natural animosity before they engage the knowledge network. There's this book, right? There's Alex's book of saying, hey, no, listen, you're a progressive. Bitcoin is for progressives. There's a lot of progressive values in Bitcoin. Bitcoin can empower entire countries out of, poverty, can bring infrastructure, blah, blah. If you're a conservative, hey, listen, you're a conservative. Good Lord, let me tell you exactly about the individual sovereignty that Bitcoin can give you. You don't like your money being printed away and, supporting programs you might not like. You know what? There's this network that really you're converting your fiat that typically gets inflated away into a network where, through monetized atoms, your life work is preserved. So this ties to your original question, Nicki, of wherever folks are, there is an answer, because again, Bitcoin is apolitical and Bitcoin is sound. It's a sound network monetizing energy, the most pure form of capital, right? Energy. So policymakers are so early in the process Obviously, the Kingdom of Bhutan is ahead of most of nation states. President Kelly from El Salvador got ahead of the IMF by buying Bitcoin, and we can see the IMF has an entire team of economists. Think about it. The International Monetary Fund is an entire team of economists dedicated to stopping Bitcoin adoption by nation states. This is not me saying or Nicki saying that. This is just us reading through the research they have put out. So clearly, they are very early in that learning curve, right? They're like, oh no, we can't control it. This is the XYZ reasons why nation states cannot adopt. But El Salvador got ahead and bought it. Kingdom of Bhutan continues mining it. The now president of the US, President Trump, has announced the intention to mine Bitcoin in the US. So eventually, these policymakers will have to expand their perspective on Bitcoin wherever they fall in the political spectrum, right? Because Bitcoin is apolitical. It has many answers for conservative perspectives, also for progressive, Democrats perspectives, and libertarians, and everything in between. Green Party, no party, everything. I think that the attacks we're seeing is a function of that quest for control and planning of policy. But there's the concept of bit bonds. And again, that will be for part 2 of this this episode, where we can talk about how, there's incredible research produced by BPI and Matthew Pines of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, who can benefit from the network, the Bitcoin network, and use sort of, the returns of Bitcoin to fund a lot of these developments, a lot of these very national issues, right? Where every nation has very different issues they need to solve, right? So it's just a matter of time, and we're seeing it live as more nation states continue adopting, and international bodies and states as well want to attack it. And I think overall, that's just part of the adoption process. It's a great question. I like that question quite a bit, and definitely a lot more to say there.
Yeah, definitely. Gonna do a part 2 because I'm already brewing questions in my head for part 2. But now I want to talk a little bit about Bitcoin adoption, as you just mentioned in your last point, right? Google says that it's somewhere near 3 to 4%. I asked my dad and he totally disagrees. He's like, it's probably 1%, maybe 1.5%. Is there a near future where we see more and more Bitcoin adoption? Maybe a future where I can go and buy my coffee and maybe pay with some sats instead of using fiat?
Using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, MOE. Absolutely. Yes, it's being done right now. I mean, there's the Lion Network, there's Fedi, there's so many incredible resources, live technology that I can again send Nicki 3 sats and you'll get them in milliseconds. How do we get this global adoption? That will take time, and it will be a function of policymakers. It will be a function of organic adoption, decentralized adoption. There's so many local communities through the globe in Africa, Latin America, Australia. There's different businesses accepting this. So are we going to gain escape velocity in adoption? I think so. In due time, I think the store of value component of the adoption curve is necessary, right? And we can have both things at the same time. Bitcoin is store of value, and because the store of value is also a medium of exchange, right? Like if I want to give you a gold bar, a bar of gold, I can't just leave with, let's say, 10 gold bars from the US, get on a plane and bring them to Australia. I think they will confiscate them. They'll ask me why. If not in the US, at least when I land and in Australia, they'll be like, sir, what is the purpose of this? So we're at a point where, we still see that friction caused by, nation state policies, right? But there is technology that is allowing this, and we start seeing, right, some policies where are allowing for this medium of exchange. Will we see in our lifetime global adoption of Bitcoin? Possibly. More of a, I align with Jeff Booth's perspective and his book, incredible book, The Price of Tomorrow. It's going to be a chaotic transition in general. There's a lot of broken things when, as you were saying, in Australia, you can't really buy a house with just, freshly off university. You pay 4 or 5 years of tuition. You got an amazing job and you just can't buy a house. There's something inherently broken. I don't care where you fall in the political spectrum, right? But in that country, but if you're telling me a human being who gets into university, graduates from with a degree, and it's just unfathomable to buy a house, then there's deeper questions. How did we even get here? And I think that the medium of exchange, and I'm quoting here Lynn Alden, but I've heard Lynn said in a podcast a few months ago, and I'll see if I can find it. But what Lynn was saying from her travels throughout the world, it is more likely than not that in most countries I can then in a decent amount of countries I can pay with Bitcoin than with other things. Like Bitcoin is already becoming a medium of exchange globally, right? Like if I go to, let's use a country, if I go to Australia and I bring a currency from Latin America, they probably won't take the whatever currency. They might take the dollar, they might take the euro, and within those top three, top four currencies, there's a good chance they might take Bitcoin. Maybe not that many people yet, but Bitcoin is already bubbling up to that level of knowledge, right? But Bitcoin, but by business owners and also by just individuals. So, and that really resonated with me for my own research, for my own travel, saying, yeah, you know what? That is true. That is happening. Is it going to pick up as time progresses? Of course, I think it is. I think we have data showing that it is. The Cornell Bitcoin Club and Professor Sarah Krebs from Cornell is leading an incredible global Bitcoin adoption study, and the results are tentatively going to be put out sometime 2026. But there's sort of this insights that the study is putting out, and it shows sort of the global Bitcoin adoption, the global Bitcoin adoption through different regions and why, and white countries, more countries are more inclined to adopt it. Is it countries that have hyperinflation and instability versus countries that maybe are pretty stable relatively to those countries, right? But I do think in general the MOE component of Bitcoin will pick up even more, for sure. That's a phenomenal question, and that's a yes on my end. In due time, yes, it will.
I mean, that's awesome to hear. My dad and I, so he's visiting me at the time right now, and we just went to a Bitcoin meetup here in Australia. And I was so excited about it. I mean, I downloaded my first wallet and I downloaded Strike and I learned about the Lightning Network. And I was like, I'm going to go, I'm going to pay with some sats. This is going to be so much fun. And they hadn't booted up their machine yet at the time. But, I was so excited about it because it's just the idea that we're seeing something on the rise that could potentially be a new form of money, and a new form of money that benefits Gen Z, that is for us. I mean, as I mentioned earlier with the housing crisis, right? In Australia, pretty much impossible to buy a home. And if you're a foreigner, if you're, an immigrant, it's even harder to buy a home for you. And
Why is that, Nikki, in your opinion? Why is it impossible? What are you seeing there? How bad is it? What's your personal experience from?
I think so. Number one thing is the home prices. They have
Okay.
increased, I think, like twofold since COVID in areas like Sydney and Melbourne. I mean, it is impossible. And a lot of the reason is because there's been a lot of demand for housing in Australia, particularly for an investment. So a lot of people have come down from, China and Singapore that, want to invest their money into Australia, and they've bought apartments or homes and put them on Airbnb. So something that we're seeing, especially in major cities, Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, is that there's a lot of Airbnbs, a lot of housing that can be used for people that are living here being vacant, essentially. So because of this, the government has also, tightened regulations, and I'm not too well versed on, what exactly the regulations are. But from what I understand it has become increasingly harder and virtually impossible for foreigners to invest in Australia, to buy a home, especially if you haven't been here for a long time. So I'm here as a student. If I wanted to go and not live in a student accommodation, not rent somewhere, if I wanted to buy an apartment, I pretty much can't. And
Really?
that's not,
Wow.
yeah, that's not quite the case in the US. As far as I understand it, it's a little bit easier to buy a home there. And prices have surged, but I think the real estate market is doing a little bit better than it is here. And, there's a shortage of supply as well because COVID happened and, stopped building houses. And now we're feeling the aftermaths of that pause on building houses because population has increased. I mean, the population in Australia has grown. I think it's about maybe 25, 26 million now, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to the US, which has like 330 million or something like that. But, it's all concentrated on the coast, right? It's all concentrated in the cities. So there's a lot of people and not enough houses. But that,
And Nikki,
I
have you as a visiting student and having, you're an incredible builder of bridges with your knowledge, and I really honor that. Like, think about it. You have the U.S. experience. Now you're visiting a different country, and you're able to sort of keep on connecting those dots, right, and compare. What are your colleagues, your peers from natives from Australia? What are they saying? Like, what about this issue, which is sad. It's horrible to hear this, right? What have you heard for folks that have only lived in Australia, right? That might not have this comparison.
So I think the sentiment amongst Australians, amongst citizens, is the same as it is amongst American citizens right now. So over in America, Gen Z are feeling like it's just becoming harder to buy a home because it's drifting further into our financial future. You need to have more money. And while the prices of homes are increasing, both in the US and here, the wages are not. The wages, I think, point blank, are not increasing at the rate at which they should be if the cost of living is going up almost exponentially. So it's a lot of the same stuff. People feeling just drifting further into financial nihilism, saying, I won't ever be able to buy a house. I can never get married because I can't afford it. I don't want to have kids because I can't afford that life. And I don't want to give them a bad life, which is the responsible thing to do. But it's disheartening. It's completely disheartening. I mean, it's crushed so many dreams. I think about it. My parents, they moved from India to the US in 2005. I was born in 2006, my brother in 2009. So my parents were like, my mom was, I think, 21, my dad 23 when they got married, and my mom was 25 when she had me. So this is something that is almost impossible for us to envision for ourselves. I am 19, I'm turning 20 in a bit, and the idea of living the life that my mom lived, getting married at 21, having, my first kid at 25, it's impossible because financially I can't picture that for myself, right? The job market is awful, especially I'm studying computer science, so especially in tech with AI coming into play. Not that I think AI is a bad thing, I think it's a great thing. And it's definitely going to be a really, really formative tool for society, but that's a bit off topic. But the job market is going to change. So and I think that's the downside of being what my dad likes to call, the fourth turning generation, and you know, being kind of the pioneers are the ones to feel the effects of all the things that are going to happen. So, I kind of went on a rant there, but I did want to ask you, where does Gen Z fit into, this political economy conversation, into Bitcoin becoming a new voting bloc, into, increased global adoption?
Well, your father is a wise man. I have to, based on what you're saying, and the fourth turning generation, and I'm gonna have to quote him on that. I have to quote your father. The fourth turning generation, and for folks from your audience that might not know much about that, it's pretty much the conceptual framework of sort of there's turnings, right? And in every the fourth turn then is sort of where things get a lot worse before they get better, right? And there is sort of this sort of analysis and statistical regressions where the authors of this framework sort of show, hey, this is actually cyclical. This has happened through different periods in history and regions and whatnot. So incredible analysis and books that are available for the readers. I would agree here with your father as far as the fourth turning generation. I think that as a generation that is being dealt with a lot of first, right? The first pandemic, the first unaffordable home prices to the level that you were sharing in Australia, obviously here in the US as well, and many, many firsts too, in general, many firsts. As a generation, there is an inability to affect change until there is an ability, right? There is a despair, there is a frustration, and thank you for sharing sort of the sentiment of what you're seeing from native Australians, right? From Australians that have not had this foreign experience in other countries. Because you could literally replace Australia with the US, and folks will say something similar. They'll say, oh my God, I just graduated from college. I did the right things. I came here. I saved my whole life and I can't afford anything. I can't have a child like was 25, 26-year-old that you said your mom. I literally was getting similar feedback from colleagues that are graduated from a prestigious MBA. They're a little older and they're like, we're going to have to delay having kids because we can't afford it. And, those are pretty tough things to listen, right? And realities for many, many people. And I think that for this generation, your generation, it's not just about voting, as important as it is. And I think everybody should vote. I think that there's many, many benefits to a representative democracy. But there's also the knowledge network. And I hate kind of coming back to that, right? But if we feel hopeless and helpless, but this will be part of the second part two of this, but we can talk about the increased numbers in suicides across many generations. We can talk about the increased numbers in mental health, the increased numbers in homelessness. We can talk, I mean, it gets dark very quickly. And guess what? Poverty really knows no boundaries. Poverty sucks to be poor regardless of the race you're in, the age bracket, the income. Like it just sucks, right? Whatever age, whatever race, whatever background, it's horrible, right? Poverty sucks. I want to normalize saying that and bringing attention to that. We need to tiptoe around it. And then as the generation that's emerging amongst this turning, right, to quote your wise father, then what tools do you have as a generation? Well, voting for one. Okay, great. Every 4 years, or depending on how involved you are, you can vote for your local elections, state elections, and presidential elections, right? Depending on how involved you are. But that's one partial way of having impact, right? Folks want their wages, to your point, everything's going up except wages, at least as far as, as fast as the dollar prices. You're absolutely right. So then we have to educate ourselves and, okay, so what else can I do? What other tools do I have beyond just voting? Well, strengthening the knowledge network for yourself, following Larry Fink's advice. Well, maybe I can start with 1% to 2% allocation over a 4-year horizon, from 1% to 2% to 10% of your network. That's a meaningful gain. You factor in Bitcoin's CAGR over a 4-year period, it's very hard to beat that. So that's one component, right? You can educate yourself on what tools are available. Obviously, Bitcoin is one of them. And I think in general, right, beyond just Bitcoin, like you can't eat Bitcoin. Can't eat it. Like I can't just eat it. And I just don't want to sit here in front of a laptop looking at Bitcoin's prices, right? That's a little silly. That's not the point of that's not all that Bitcoin can do, right? Like you're not just going to watch the price. And I think that while you cannot eat Bitcoin, investing or allocating some of your fiat, some of your life's work into Bitcoin can then allow you to source and procure better quality food, figuratively and literally. And somebody can say, oh, how? Well, if we look at Bitcoin's entire performance and its, CAGR and its 4-year average, it's just going up. But it's going up because it's a sign, it's shedding light with a lamp into the infinite printing machine of nation states to come up with answers to problems. There's no scarcity framework anymore as much as there is a printing machine framework. And that's taken its toll, as you have so vividly described with Australians, as we have talked about here in the US, as we can reflect on the Argentinian folks that have dealt with hyperinflation, Zimbabwe. I mean, we can talk about this. This is real people, real life, real human beings dealing with those challenges. So while you cannot eat Bitcoin, it can allow you allocating a percentage of your time and knowledge to learn about it can then lead for you to allocate some of your life's effort and work through allocating a percentage of fiat, whether you want to follow the Larry Fink's model from BlackRock or whatever personal allocation you feel comfortable with. And then you're actually, as you see your wealth not being devalued, that will then allow you to start thriving. It will allow you to say, oh, I'm working. This is not being debased. This is not being devalued. What does that mean? Maybe I am able to then start a family a little earlier than before. Maybe I am able to take care of my diet and my food because I can afford these things, right? And that sort of knowledge growth requires sort of this truth-seeking component of, are you willing to put in the work, the proof of work, to start answering those fairly uncomfortable questions, right? It's like, why is it that my purchasing power is decreasing? Well, depending on how deep you want to go, that can lead to feeling very lonely, very helpless, a lot of negative feelings that there's this knowledge network you're contributing to with this incredible work you're putting with your podcast to help provide folks with a bridge so that they continue. Right? You're not making a moral judgment on people. You're simply saying, hey, I'm Nicki. I'm asking this question. I have this questions for myself. And here, I'm open sourcing my thought process. This is what I believe. That's incredible. Many blessings to you for doing that. That's just, you're open sourcing your contribution to the knowledge network, right? And imagine the people that they might hear you saying one reflection that might say, hey, Nicki's going through that. She's feeling all these things. She's going through all these frustrations. You know what? Me too. Let me listen to her more. Let me DM her. You know what? I want to read the book she mentioned. And that might lead to this person ultimately deciding to allocate some of, follow the Larry Fink model, right? And protect her life's work. So I'm hopeful. And you are a living example and proof of work of doing it. And I honor that. I really, really honor that. And I honor you and your proof of work on doing that.
I mean, thank you. This is coming from you. The research that you've done has been just, I read it. I read it a few weeks ago. And the moment I read it, I was like, wow. Bitcoin is not just a technology, right? It's not just a form of money. I mean, this is the solution to everything that we're feeling. Bitcoin is to me, it's social justice. And I think that's just incredible. And I mean, as for the knowledge network, I can only hope. I mean, I think I was 10 or 11 years old when my dad brought home this $10 trillion note from Zimbabwe that one of his coworkers who had visited Zimbabwe had given to him. And he said, look, this is $10 trillion. And I was like, oh my God, $10 trillion. Like, that's insane. He hands me the note. And I was like, I didn't even know they printed these. He's like, this is inflation. This is what happens when countries go bankrupt. I mean, 11 years old, right? And my brother was 8 at the time. And so we were just like, what do you mean? 10 trillion is so much. It's so much money. Like, we should be living like kings if we have $10 trillion. And my dad's like, this won't even buy you a loaf of bread in Zimbabwe. And I think that moment, I was like, there's something wrong with the world. 11 years old, you're not really thinking about it much. So I did want to, ask you a bit, educators, as people who are talking about Bitcoin and are trying to get the message out there, when it's not well received, when, I'll look at my analytics and I'll see, I have like 4 or 5% Gen Z viewers. I have even lower, like 2% female viewers as well. And it's discouraging. So what can we, tell ourselves, what can we do to keep our conviction and keep going and just keep pushing our, agenda forward?
That's a very, very beautiful question. And I'm grateful that you're asking that, because it shows the pureness of your intention behind what you do. So I wanted to emphasize that. That's very meaningful that you think like that.
Thank you.
And as educators, I agree with you. We need that 2% of female viewers to be 50% to reach parity of the real world. And you should not, and neither should I, stop until that number goes, continues going up. And we reflect the distribution curve of real world. The biggest thing, Nicki, that I found, and having understood Bitcoin in 2017, people thought I was crazy. I was that crazy Bitcoin guy. I was that, Sal, that's dirty. Sal, what are you doing? Sal, buy this other crypto. This is a better Bitcoin. But because of what I have gone through in my life experience, and having experience sort of that, having things been taken away through no fault of your own, I had conviction early on what it was. Lo and behold, fast forward 8 years after, we're now doing this. Larry Fink is talking about it. You have nation states mining it. I wasn't wrong. I was early. And I was really late if I'm to compare myself to, Hal Finney, rest in peace, was standing on the shoulders of giants like him. Right? So the fact that you're doing this, Nicki, is something I cannot applaud enough. And whenever you feel discouraged, when you see those 2% of female viewers only, I would invite you to say, okay, there's at least 2%. How can we get that to 4? How do we then get it to 8? And then 16, and then 32? Because if there's 2, that means that there's people listening to Nicki right now. And that means that you are touching someone's life right now. Not when Bitcoin hits whatever number people talk about. No, like right now, Nicki can go to her settings, analytical settings, and see there's 2%. That's incredible that they were listening. Wow. And I'm only, on whatever episode we're in. You literally have started less than a year ago, less than a few months ago. So the way I frame my perspective of the world, the way I decided to dedicate this next chapter of my life to this space, to the knowledge network of Bitcoin, is by saying, Okay, there's a lot of people using Bitcoin. You have Larry Fink, Mr. Michael Saylor as well. You have President Trump, President McCullough, the Kingdom of Bhutan. You have all these leadership from across the political spectrum, financial spectrum, everything. Speaking about Bitcoin, do they capture everything for the entire world? Of course not. Of course not. Well, what can I do? Well, I can share my story. Well, I can help connect the dots. I can speak some language that connects with someone. I can frame it. And you have no idea what incredible gift you have given me in this conversation by saying, I read your paper and I think, I couldn't help but just really see that Bitcoin in reality, there's a part of it of social justice. I mean, I get emotional processing that because I'm like, it's incredible when I'm typing that and I'm connecting the dots. You then process that and spark your own analysis. That means that now we're connecting the dots. How Nicki's and Sal's are growing this knowledge network. And then we're going to connect with that 2% of female viewers that will then become 4% and then 8. And then you also have the background of, you can say, you know what, my parents came here, they worked really hard. And now I would love to kind of have these things they achieve at some age. And it seems that I won't be able to do it at those ages. There's only one Nicki that can say that in the world. That's you, because that's your story. So the fact that you are willing to open source with your knowledge, your journey across the knowledge network and contributing to the knowledge network through this, it is exactly the type of resilience, strength, and necessity that solving these issues that we have talked about need. We need to do this and not to wait for someone to do it. Sure, we can go and vote, and I think people should vote, and I think people should, you know, if you think education is important and you think it's going to give you more money and everything, sure, pursue that. If you think entrepreneurship is to each, there's everything, right? But the knowledge network and what you're doing, it is exactly, I think, what you can do right now on top of voting, on top of staying sort of, the cost of Bitcoin is permanently learning why you believe in it. Some people believe in it from the computer science perspective, other ones from the econ perspective, other ones from sociological perspective. Whatever it is that rocks people's boats with that. What's distinctly different about Bitcoin is that you keep on putting in the work to understand it because it's such a new nascent technology. It's the gift that Satoshi provided, right, to the world. And as the world evolves, requires for you to have this multidisciplinary approach. And you, Nicki, are a living example of the hope, the positivity, and all that's possible for this generation. And I'm just honored to be able to listen to this live. I mean, you're giving me and your whole audience many gifts of hope. This is beautiful.
It's been an incredible conversation. So thank you for coming on and thank you for sharing all of your insights, all of your research with some Gen Z that are going to be listening to this. So one thing that I like to do, I like to wrap up my interviews by asking if there's one resource, book, video, podcast, something that you would recommend to someone who's, Gen Z watching this and just starting to think about Bitcoin.
You know what? I think wherever you are, from my own experience, my own learning journey, and I continue learning and putting the proof of work every day, there's a particular author and thought leader in the space that has distinctly influenced and helped me in my own learning process, and his name is Jeff Booth. Jeff Booth wrote a book that's called The Price of Tomorrow. When I see a podcast with Jeff Booth, I pause and I listen to it, and I take my pen and paper out. And as I go through my own learning process, I have come back to many of his abundant podcasts on YouTube, on Google, whatever platform people use. And there's something timeless about his own journey of how he shares with his insights, but also how he has evolved on it, right? I think he can be a fairly timeless resource of knowledge wherever folks are across the learning curve. There's many other books like we can talk and everything, but something as easy as, hey, just Google Jeff Booth, listen to anything that he has said or buy his book. I think that I'm very comfortable sort of answering that question with this particular easy to digest bit.
I'm going to link The Price of Tomorrow, and there's a video that I watched on that Jeff Booth did as well on Simply Bitcoin. I will link that. That one's a great one. But Sal, thank you so much for coming on and, sharing your story and your research with us today, from the Cornell Bitcoin Club to diving deep into mining and the political economy. I mean, I have learned so much. This has been an incredibly valued conversation. And for everyone listening, check out Sal's work. I'm going to add the links to the published papers, all the field reports that were mentioned in this video, his socials, all of the resources that we've talked about, and obviously the price of tomorrow as well. If you're Gen Z and you're just starting out your Bitcoin journey, please let this be a reminder. You don't need to be an expert to contribute. I'm not an expert. Anyone can contribute. You can start a club, you can write, start a podcast, or just ask questions. I mean, going out to drinks and dinner with your friends, that's all you need to do. And just talking about what's the problem? I mean, what's going on? Why are we losing money? As Sal said, right? But the Bitcoin knowledge network grows when we're all sharing what we're learning. So make sure to subscribe if you like this video to the Orange Peel podcast. Share this episode with a friend. Let me know in the comments what you liked or what parts of, Bitcoin's political or energy side that you want me to explore next and you want Sal to discuss, because he will be coming on for a part 2 in a few weeks' time. So until next time, stay skeptical, stay curious, and stay orange-pilled. I will see you next week.